everyone, my name is Michael Carbone, and today I'm going to run through an example of a married couple who's in pretty good shape financially, but they should probably wait just another few years before they retire. So let's run through some of the key facts and assumptions that we'll be making in helping this hypothetical couple, Leon and Kathy Woods, to determine whether or not they can retire with relatively low risk of ever running out of money during their lifetime. Leon and Kathy, for simplicity, they're both the age of 64. They plan to retire in 2 years at the age of 66. For retirement income, what they're expecting, Leon will be taking his Social Security at the age of 70, so will earn some delayed credits for waiting, and is expecting that his benefits will be roughly $53,000, or closer to $54,000 a year before taxes, and that's in 2024 dollars. Kathy, she has a slightly lower benefit, which will be $21,000. And, that's after it's reduced for the fact that she's taking it slightly before her full retirement age, at 65 instead of 67. Kathy's also expecting a pension of around $15,000 a year beginning at the age of 65. So starting next year, they'll have a little extra income, in addition to their wages. And that as soon as they're retired, they'll have a period of 4 years or so where they have an income of, around $35,000 before Leon's Social Security starts up, which they'll then receive around $90,000 before taxes and any deductions for their Medicare premiums or anything like that. For financial assets, not to be confused with their total assets, their money that they have in retirement accounts and savings accounts and brokerage accounts, anything that they can quickly access. They have, as you can see, around $2.4 million in total. You can look at this a little bit more closely. Just the breakdown, they have a mixture of IRAs and 401ks and Roth IRAs. Then they have regular taxable brokerage accounts. In total, in stocks and bonds, they have roughly 2/3 of their money invested in stocks and 1/3 in bonds and cash. And the total that they have in non-retirement taxable accounts is around $1 million. In retirement accounts, they have a total aggregate balance of around 1.4. And in total, their financial assets amount to $2.4 million. All right. So let's spend some time going over the spending needs of Leon and Kathy when they go to retire. And I think that this is probably the most important exercise that you can do in determining when you can retire, because at the end of the day, your spending needs will dictate how much money that you need to take from your money. And then in turn, the amount of money that you need to take off your money will dictate how much growth that you need on your money to sustain that spending and so on. So it's a really important variable. And I think that it's really easy to get it wrong. So, I would suggest spending a lot of time on that and doing this for yourself. But so let's take a look at what we're assuming for Leon and Kathy's spending. So we're assuming total expenses in retirement or total expenses today are around $200,000. And so we separate this out by what's fixed and what's variable. And so the fixed would be like a mortgage. If you have a fixed mortgage, they have a $30,000 annual expense and principal and interest payments that won't rise. They will stay flat. They won't rise. Inflation isn't an issue. The non-debt portion of their expenses, their normal lifestyle expenses, will rise as the costs of goods and services will rise over time. So that's why you separate them out. But so the total expenses are around 200 grand. 30 of that's going to the mortgage. 170 of that's going to non-mortgage. But how did we get here? So when you're trying to figure out how much you need for spending, you can certainly build a budget, and that's a good exercise, to see what you're spending your money on. But I think that's the most effective, most realistic way to do it is to simply look at how much income that you've had historically, and how much of that has been spent. So you essentially back into a spending estimate because, these are the facts. You have proof that you had money come in, and then either your savings accounts rose or they stayed flat or they fell. So, obviously I made this couple up. So, these are just numbers that I made up, but so Leon, he brought in around $175,000 and he had around 30,000 grand that went into 401ks. He didn't touch that money, went directly into the 401k. He couldn't spend it. Kathy, she was earning 200 grand. 8 grand of that was going into a 401k. They had interest and dividends that were earned on that $1 million we just talked about that was outside retirement accounts. On all of this, they paid 112 grand in taxes between their federal and state income taxes, their capital gains taxes, all that. So what's left over? The yellow box here, they around 255 grand in cash that they've historically been able to spend on whatever they wanted to spend it on. So the question is, did they spend it? And as you can see here, I added in a $65,000 annual permanent addition to their savings. So outside of retirement accounts, were their bank savings rising? And so in their case, they were saving around 65 grand a year. That's money that was not going into retirement accounts. It was just being accumulated in their assets. And it was, so this is permanent savings. And then from there, I further adjust that by $10,000 because there are needs that you wouldn't have in a typical year, but they're bound to occur over time. These are things like intermittent home upkeep and maintenance, buying new vehicles with cash. And so after adjusting all of it, we arrive at a final estimate of $200,000. And so that's what we're assuming that they're spending today. But now what we need to look at is how will that spending evolve throughout retirement? Because what I've found, and most of you I'm sure would agree with me that as you age, you typically slow down and you do less stuff. You travel less, you go out to eat less, you do less activities, you spend less money. And so it's important to try and account for this so that your projections are as realistic as possible. And so the way that we do this is we make assumptions for scenarios. So as you can see here, I'm assuming that their lifestyle moderately slows beginning at the age of 75. And then by the time they reach the age of 85, they have incremental costs due to, just the fact that they're aging and they require more, needs for their medical situation, whether that's, more prescriptions or more, visits to, doctors or different types of specialists. Most likely, most retirees, when they get into the later stages of their life, their out of pocket costs will rise. And obviously there are, don't mind my dog in the background. There are, stop losses and, there are deductibles and whatnot. But generally speaking, on average, expenses rise due to typical, just healthcare related needs, even custodial care, but that's a different issue. But so I'm assuming that their expenses rise beginning at the age of 85 by around 15 grand a year in today's dollars, just simply due to those incremental healthcare expenses. So what does that look like? The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to look at the spending without any effects of inflation, because that way you can sort of eyeball it and say, all right, well, this would amount to in today's dollars. I understand that. So in 2024 dollars, as you can see, they're spending 200 grand a year between the orange is non-mortgage, the blue is mortgage. The mortgage drops off as we already discussed. So thereafter, they're spending 170 grand. They're consistently spending that amount of money until they reach age 75. Their lifestyle begins to slow. They're spending less and less money. Now they're 84. They're spending 145 grand, which you may argue is high, and that is pretty high. But that's what they spend based on what they've been spending. And then when they reach age 85, their expenses rise, to an amount of 160 grand. And then gradually, they continue to drop off. Now they're, 100 years old, they're spending 130 grand a year. So now what we do is we take what their spending needs we're projecting or assuming their spending needs will be throughout retirement. And we're modeling based on their assets and their income, how much money can they afford to take from their money and sustain, and continue to live their lifestyle in retirement without running out of money. So we're going to talk about that now. All right. So let's see how this all plays out for Leon and Kathy in retirement. And so what you're looking at on your screen is cash flow. It's relatively straightforward conceptually. You have their inflows from their wages, from their interest, from their dividends, Social Security and pensions eventually. And then you have their outflows that they pay in taxes, they spend on their living expenditures, paying their mortgage. And then what's left over, it's either positive or negative. If it's positive, the cash flow is being then added to their assets. If it's negative, it's being spent from their assets. And so what we're trying to understand, and this is the essence of retirement planning for someone that's trying to simply maintain their lifestyle and not run out of money. What we're trying to understand is, do their assets hold up, right, as they're spending this money from it each year and they're earning a return? do their assets last for the rest of their life? And of course, we don't know how long they're going to live, but we can make reasonable assumptions and we can gauge a general time frame for when their money is likely to run out. And then from there, we can make a decision. So we have their wages. Clearly, they drop off when they retire. They're then replaced by their pensions and Social Security. As you can see, they don't have much in Social Security until Leon's kicks in right around here when he's 70. So the net effect of all this is when they retire, now their cash flow is negative by 126 grand, and that money is being spent off their money. All right. And so what we're trying to control for is the growth rate on their money, because at the end of the day, that's probably the variable that is that's hardest to predict, and that's going to fluctuate over time. So we want to look at this from several angles. And so as you can see in the first scenario that we're using, we're assuming that their returns on their money rise linearly, which is a fancy word for in a straight line. And this is of course not realistic, but it's a good way to just to gauge kind of where they stand based on a reasonable assumption for a growth rate based on how their money is allocated. And so we're assuming 5.5%, and then they retire, they dial back their stock a little bit to 60/40. Now they're earning 5.3%. Their money, how long does it last? It lasts until they're around the age of 93. So in a straight line world, that's a pretty good outcome. I think that, it's a reasonable assumption. You're 93, you run out of money, and then you've got Social Security. But at that point, you're really not doing much. So that's a reasonable outcome. But so we don't want to just simply accept that. So what we're going to do is we're going to model some different scenarios. So here I'm going to begin their retirement at on the eve of the dot-com bubble, which if you're familiar with the history of it, the ensuing 10-year returns they are considered a lost decade, which means that they really didn't make any money, and which by historical standards is an outlier outcome. It's a bad outcome. So let's say their money would hold up under that scenario. So saying they retire on the eve of the dot-com bubble. So now, as you can see, they're retired, their returns drop off to what actually happened. So their portfolio was invested 40% in bonds, so the returns were either sort of downside was limited compared to what would have otherwise happened if they had all their money in stock. But as you can see, the return over that 10-year period is around 1.4% annually with dividends and interest. And so that is, by all accounts, much lower than the long-term historical average. And what we're trying to understand is, based on those growth rates early on in retirement, they're losing money as they're spending 6% off of their portfolio. How does that affect how long their money lasts? And as you can see, the money lasts until around 82. And, you might argue, well, that's around the life expectancy, but I would caution you to be careful with that, because it's not unlikely for one spouse to live into their late 80s or their 90s. And if you're, basing your whole decision on, your money potentially lasting under a bad case scenario to around your life expectancy, then you've got some exposure there to, potentially, a spouse being left without any assets, for, a period of, maybe even 5-10 years in retirement, which isn't a good scenario. Um, so you've got the money lasting until around 82 based on a, relatively bad case scenario, assuming that they retired on the eve of the dot-com bubble. But let's look at another scenario. Let's take another approach and use an approach to financial planning that's probably the more common approach in the financial services industry. It's referred to as a Monte Carlo simulation. You may or may not be familiar with that term, but it's sort of a buzzword in my world. So, but it is a very helpful exercise, and can give us a lot of insights to the likelihood that you may or may not run out of money. So let's see how it works for Leon and Kathy. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn it on, turned on. And so what you're doing here, just to give you some context, But Monte Carlo, all it's doing is instead of defining what the exact growth rate on your money will be in each year for the rest of your life, it's making an assumption and creating a random return or a random growth rate on your portfolio based on the statistical characteristics of risk and return of how your portfolio is allocated. So if you have all of your money in stock, this can be a higher average return, but there could be a potentially larger down year and a particularly larger up year. And so we're simply just using the law of large numbers. We're simply using the law of large numbers to try and understand what the likely range of outcomes is. Um, so just bear with me. It's a hard concept to explain, but I'll just show you what's going on under the hood. So we're essentially taking the random return each year and we're doing it 1,000 times, and then we're using all of the outputs to try and understand what the likely range of potential outcomes are. And that can be really useful information to make an informed decision. So let's take a look here at what the outcome is. So we run 1,000 simulations based on Leon and Kathy's, spending needs, their income, all the other assumptions that we're making, or what is the range of outcomes that we might expect to see. And so what I like to do is I look at in this case, I'm doing a 99% range. I like to understand what the highest likelihood is of outcomes, based on what we're assuming. And so in this case, there's a 99% chance that they'll run out of money somewhere between the age of 77 and 95. So the 77 being the very, highly unlikely, but, potential scenario where they may run out of money. And so Leon and Kathy, being the average, American retiree, they're relatively, risk averse. And so they look at the age 77 and say, well, I do understand that there's an extremely low probability that that does occur, but I do also understand that there's a very high probability that I will live, or at least one of us will live, beyond the age of 77. And so, they decide that they're not comfortable with those odds. And I wouldn't be either. I think that if you want to be certain, if you're making a decision about retirement and you're not willing to go back to work, then, your range of outcomes should be higher than age of 77. I think that it would be nice to have a very bad case scenario being at least somewhere in your 80s, and it's subjective and there's a lot of interpretation, but I think in this case, I would recommend that if they want more certainty, to work just another few years, and let's just see how that affects them. So say they decide to retire at 68 instead of 66. We'll see how that changes the distribution. So now, as you can see, 77 to 95, there's a 99% chance the money runs out. If they work just another 2 years, now their money, in a very bad case scenario, gets them at least until the age of 81, which is their life expectancy. So the average outcome, in this case, is going to be somewhere in their late 80s to early 90s, which I think is a really good odds, especially after you take into consideration the other more conservative assumptions that we're making. For example, we're assuming Social Security benefits rise by 1% less than what their expenditures are rising by. So, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but the point is, we're taking in all of these assumptions that we're making. We understand whether, they're conservative, how likely it is that they'll come to pass. And then we're essentially forming an opinion based on, all of the inputs and the outputs, based on how likely or unlikely they are to run out of money. And so in this case, the recommendation for Kathy and Leon Woods is to work just a little bit longer, even though they have done such a great job at saving. They've accumulated good amount of savings. But they do enjoy their lifestyle. They spend, more money than a typical American retiree. And so their priority is to maintain that lifestyle throughout retirement. So anyway, I do recognize that I babbled a lot on this video. So, please, if you have any questions or want clarification on anything, just shoot me an email, or give me a call, and I'm more than glad to have a discussion with you. And then also, if you feel like you'd be a good candidate for a complimentary consultation, I left the link in the description of this video, and it'll have you just answer a few questions. And if you are, someone that would, benefit from that call, then it will bring you to my calendar. You can set up a meeting with me. But in any case, I appreciate you watching the video. I hope you got some good information from it. And I wish you the very best of luck, and I hope to hear from you soon.